Hello and welcome to Take Time. I am your host Patrick Marlett, and today we're taking a look at a watch named Zenobia. The Zenobia is a Divers Watches Facebook group exclusive, limited to 300 models, that is made in collaboration with Prometheus. Now, if you're wondering what Zenobia pays tribute to, it pays tribute to a Swedish ferry that sunk in Larnaca Bay. And I might be pronouncing that wrong, but you could see what I'm talking about right there. That is what the ferry looked like, I'm assuming, when it was still above sea level. Now, there are a couple versions of the Zenobia. I have version D in, which stands for delightful. I don't know, it's just the color option, and I know for sure that it didn't stand for delicate because this is one heavy hunk of steel here. The Zenobia D, as well as every other variant, will come with a no-date version or a dated variant, as I have here. Now, before I begin this video, I'd like to thank my pal Al over at the Wrist Fund on Instagram for sending this watch in for review. He works alongside Divers Watches Facebook group to get these watches out to people. So thank you, Al, for sending this my way. Prometheus, when's our collab? We could make a tight watch, Prometheus. Come on, I've got a group of people that would love to get their very own watch. I'm just saying. Anyways, I've had the Zenobia in for a little over a week now, and I am raring to share my thoughts with you all. I've been wanting to get a watch with a banana yellow dial like this for some time, and for the longest time, green dials and yellow dials were very, very uncommon. Just exotic colorations for dials. I'm seeing green a lot more often now, but yellow and orange, as a matter of fact, have fallen by the wayside. So it's nice to see them come out, brands in general, with more yellow dial options. And the yellow here is really aesthetically pleasing. But more on that in a second. Now, before I begin my review, of course, as with all my reviews, I like to start with the bad and then move on to the good before I give my final verdict on a review item. So without further ado, let's talk Zenobia. The Zenobia, damn, that's fun to say. The Zenobia is 43 millimeters in diameter. It's 49 millimeters from lug end to lug end. It is approximately 13.6 millimeters thick, so it's a big old girl, and has 22 millimeter lug widths. The Zenobia is, of course, made out of 316L stainless steel with a matching stainless steel bracelet, and up top side we have a 3 millimeter thick sapphire crystal. That's a thick girl. And under that yellow dial is an ETA 2824. Say it with me now, Zenobia is a 500-meter diver with a black ceramic bezel insert, as well as BGW9 Superluminova, tricking out the entirety of this dial, as well as that 120-click bezel. When you purchase one of these suckers, you can get it with a 24-month warranty. Of course, any of the color options as listed on their page, and I'll encourage you to check out the link in the description to see all of the color pairings. The piece itself has a $100 deposit on it, and in total will cost you $550. $550 at a 2824, 3 millimeters of sapphire crystal. Well, that all sounds like a great deal. However, how does this watch stand up in day-to-day use? I have to say, I'm not a huge fan of any of the bracelets I've received from a Borealis or Prometheus watch. I've actually purchased Borealis watches ages ago. When I got into collecting, I was very much interested in micros, and for some reason Borealis was on my radar. I was buying up a lot of sub Homages, and they did one. That was nice, but again, the bracelet didn't really cut it for me. And the same issue with that watch I have here. The bracelet itself isn't made that well. Now, the first thing I want to point out is with the links of the bracelet. This is my first negative. It's kind of a big one. I don't think these bracelets are made that well. If you were to just push up against the bottom here, you won't notice it at first glance, but you see how there's a gap between the links here, the center links as well as that outer link. It's just not constructed well. You know, the tolerances for these bracelets, hopefully you get a model that sans this gap, but if you do find it does have a gap between the links here, I wouldn't necessarily trust wearing this for a long duration of time, and I would ask that they replace it. Now, of course, this is essentially a working prototype I received, but I will say that when I've purchased watches from Borealis in the past, I owned an Astoral, and I forget what the other model is called, but I've had issues with not only how they machined the tubing for the crowns, but also the bracelets. And it was this very similar defect here. So be sure to have this checked as soon as you get the watch and replaced if there's an issue with the links. But also while we're looking at those links, we've had watches in the past that have had this issue too, but it's 316L stainless steel. However, it has a chrome-like sheen to it. It has this very high gloss look to it that makes it look a little cheap and almost plated in a sense. So, the build quality as well as the sheen to the links just makes it look cheap overall. And you can see a little bit more of what I'm talking about over here. Pardon how smudgy this is. It's a little bit of a smudge magnet, but you can see what I'm talking about. Maybe it's the polish they use to get the high polished effect on these steel bits, but you can see what I mean. It just has a gloss to it that makes it look cheap. And I know what you're saying, $550, that is relatively speaking pretty affordable, but I've seen watches sub 600, sub 500 that have better finishing and detailing, as well as better construction. So I expected just a little bit more out of this bracelet. Unfortunately, that's something that Prometheus and in turn Borealis need to work on moving forward. Another issue I found with the Zenobia isn't only how loose the links can be, but also on the opposite end, quite a different problem, how tight the links are. Again, the tolerances just need to be worked out on how they construct their bracelets, but you'll notice these links are entirely too tight. You see how the link is sort of caught up on itself between the end link as well as that first link that comes off the case. It's something that needs to be worked out by hand, but I can't even do it here. I'm actually pulling against it right now to see if I can undo this. Do you see how it's caught up on itself? It'll do this when I'm wearing it, and it's not quite, there we go, that comfortable when it does that. You sort of have like a jagged link poking into your wrist. All in all, I wouldn't recommend wearing this on the bracelet, although it's nice if your bracelet comes out well. The experience, at least in my opinion, wasn't that great. Also, aesthetically, I don't like how this end link looks. You see the naked end of the side of this case. It'd be great if the link came up to meet that arch where it was cut out alongside the case. It's just a little bit of a dirty look. I don't quite like it. Zenobia, you're such a dirty girl. But no, I don't appreciate how these end links were cut, nor the overall build of this bracelet. And also, you guys know my feelings on this type of clasp, but this dive extension, they're just okay. I always thought this platelet here looked a little cheap as well. Again, you know what? You get my opinion. Bracelet, I'm not a big fan of. Whew, man, I'm just going to take a second to wipe off all of these smudges I put on this watch. It's a little bit of a smudge magnet. And while we're on that, I guess that could be considered a bad note. If you're a little anal about how your watches look on a day-to-day basis, if you don't like smudges being all over your watch, well, guess what? You're probably going to dislike this watch for that same reason. The high gloss insert, as well as the links and the high polished bits on the watch in general, are smudge magnets. So if that's going to bug you, you might want to avoid this watch as well. But while we're talking about those high polished bits, I will state where the bracelet links have a cheap look to them, something about the high polished detailing on the case is different. It doesn't have that plated look to it. I'm a little confused as to the build quality of the case as opposed to the bracelet, because the case itself is finished and detailed extremely well. It really juxtaposes the bracelet when you see them in tandem with each other. The bracelet itself being of lesser quality to the case's superior quality. And though the case is finished well, my final bad note with this piece is in regards to the overall aesthetic of the Zenobia. It's something we've seen time and time again. It is a good value diver with a depth rating that's hopefully accurate to 500 meters. Of course, I'm never going to break this into that depth. I can say I was able to wash my hands with it just fine, but it is a thicker watch for that depth rating, and maybe not even necessarily so, because this case is actually quite similar to that of the Squale 1521. I believe that's the reference. Even the insert itself has the same aesthetic as the 1521. It's pretty much spot on to what that watch looked like, as well as the case's overall composition, the crown over at the 4 o'clock and the way the lugs are shaped. But really, that bezel just screams Squale to me. Of course, and there's also another watch that came out around that same time that did sort of copy the look of the 1521. I believe it was used in different Heuer models as well as Spiro Techniques, something like that. If you're an avid dive watch collector, you probably know what I'm talking about, but this look isn't wholly original, specifically the dial. But the color options you get here and the look in tandem with the bracelet is somewhat unique. So at least it has that going for it. Oh, and one final bad note. I don't know how you guys feel about this, but that rihat, that steel chapter ring, whatever you want to call it, I'm not a fan of the text on that ring. I would have preferred it just be brushed stainless steel. It would have looked a lot better to me. I hate text that doesn't have any relevance to the specifications of the watch or any real relevance at all. I'm sorry. I know that this is paying tribute to that fairy. However, why don't we just pay tribute with the case back? As a matter of fact, if you ever see a limited edition watch that's paying tribute, any sort of historical event and or place or thing, why don't we reserve that tribute text and engraving to solely the case back? I don't necessarily think the dial needs to shout that this is a watch in tribute to something else, especially when that tribute feels a little arbitrary in my opinion. I don't know what Prometheus's tie is with this fairy, if it's significant, or Divers Watch's Facebook group in specific, but it's just odd that we need to have that advertised on the dial because it does disrupt the look of the dial in my opinion. I think we could have just reserved that to the case back instead. It would look a lot better otherwise. And, we have the little diver dude. That is emblematic of Divers Watch's Facebook group down there. And that's enough. And as a matter of fact, if you've watched my past review of another Divers Watch's Facebook group item that Al sent in, that one also had the little diver dude on it. So, that's more than enough for me to know, if I'm a fan of that Facebook group, that it is from that group. The Zenobia text, a tad too much. All right, so I know what you're thinking. Pat, you sound like you hate this watch. Well, that's not true. Okay? I actually really like it because, call me crazy, but I really am a fan of the Squale 1521. Yeah, believe it or not, it's a really good looking case. I'd like to get a vintage model of that case because I hate the added branding on the side of those cases. Just a big Squale text on the side. It's just as obnoxious as Supreme text is on any Supreme item. That's the only thing that kills me about the 1521. I owned one in the past. Perhaps some of you know that. I sold it because I just could not get over the unnecessary branding. Almost like how I feel about the Rihat here. It's just a tad too much for me. However, otherwise, the case is great. As a matter of fact, slap this on a rubber tropic strap, and I bet you this would be a great daily diver. Now, personally, I only wore it on the bracelet for two reasons. I like to get the full experience of the package I receive, as well as the fact that I don't have any 22 tropic rubber straps, although I think this would look great with tropic rubber instead, or an MN strap, as a matter of fact, and I've got a couple of those lying around. That would have been a good switch for this. But on that one note, just a little neutral note here, there aren't any holes in the lugs, so switching out the bracelet is going to come down to you knowing how to use a spring bar removal tool. And the gap for the area that you can use that spring bar tool is actually quite small, so you'll definitely need a smaller forked end to be able to remove those end links and obviously spring bar. However, the Zenobia does have a lot going for it. If you like that traditional 60s, 70s, I believe they mentioned 60s, 70s, and 80s inspired diver design. My laptop's in front of me. Yeah. And built with the 21st century technology. Okay. Yeah, you just covered all your bases, didn't you? 60s, 70s, and 80s. If you like the look of all of those watches from those eras, for those decades of time, well, guess what? They're all captured here, because it actually does have a really good look that transcends quite a few decades. I would say 60s, 70s. I wouldn't say 80s, but you know what? Why not throw that in there? This does have an excellent look to match those divers of old, in particular, in my opinion, those Heuer Monin cases from the 70s. And you know what? As a matter of fact, I think those went into the 80s as well. So you know what? We can say 80s. Those Heuer Monin cases, the reference, I'm thinking of is the 980.006. Just look up Heuer 980.006 and you'll see what I'm talking about. But that dial is extremely similar to one of those Heuers with the longer, rather wider triangle at the 12 o'clock and the elongated rectangles at the 9 and 6 position. But obviously the other inspiration, in my opinion, is the Squale 1521 with the bezel insert as well as the case cut. It's a really great look and combination. Nothing to argue at here in the aesthetic department. This is a killer looking watch, and on the wrist, its thickness doesn't really bother me that much. It's thicker than 13 millimeters, and usually I think a watch is best at around 12 and under, but 13 millimeters thick is understandable for a big old 500-meter diver's watch. And let me know, guys, if this matches the aesthetic of any other watch you can think of. I'm sure you can think of a billion watches this looks like. Those pencil hands sort of draw your attention as well as that dial aesthetic when mixed with that stainless steel rehat. But the font styling on the bezel insert as well. Tell me if there's something that this reminds you of, and whether you like that look in combination with the overall design of this piece. I'm curious as to your thoughts as well as what this, evokes for you. It obviously has brought a few watches to mind for me. I'd love to know your thoughts on the overall design of the Zenobia. So for over $500, you're getting a watch that has an ETA 2824, and I've personally spent more than that on watches with an ETA 2824, namely my Helson Shark Diver, the manliest man's watch ever made. If you haven't watched that video yet, do yourself a favor and check it out. But I've spent more on watches with ETA 2824s. So is this a good value? I know that's always what I get asked privately. I think it's fine value-wise. Again, I would avoid the bracelet personally. I would just put it on something else. But if you like the aesthetic here, again, it's not a wholly unique aesthetic, but if it's something that appeals to you, this look that's similar to many others, and you wanted to wear something that was modern as well as had a reliable movement inside, this is a really good way to go, particularly with the color combinations that are made available with it. I mean, there's a green dial, an orange dial, a yellow dial. I think they even have meteorite dial options. It's pretty crazy. And if you've had previous experience with Prometheus, let me know if you've had similar issues that I've found with this watch and or pleasures with Prometheus watches in the past. Do you really like the build quality of the watches you've received from them? Well, feel free to back them up in the comment section down below. I'm so anxious to know your thoughts on this brand. This is my first time taking in a Prometheus, though I've experienced a few Borealis in the past. And in case you're wondering, which I'm sure many of you are, how is the bezel action on the Zenobia? For folks that like collecting dive watches, in particular, Divers Watches Facebook group, if you guys are watching this and are curious as to how that bezel action is, it's good. It's not the best I've ever felt, and certainly not the worst I've ever felt. It's right in the middle. There's some wiggle room there. It doesn't, it's not very deliberate. It's not going to lock into place as soon as you turn it. Most 120 click bezels don't have the greatest action in the world. That's usually reserved to the 60 clicks that I've found. There's a higher degree for, loose tolerances here. That's why I'm pretty sure folks stick with 120 clicks for the most part. But it's pretty nice. It's snappy. It's actually well damp as well. And it could just be the amount of steel that you're playing around with that makes it feel so damp in hand. But it's got a really nice feel to it in general. Definitely one of the ones I've played around with the most. When I get dive watches into review, I usually don't fool around with them too much unless I need to time something. But this one I fooled with regardless. It's very easy to operate with one hand, so when it's on the wrist, it's actually really pleasurable to fool with. So if you're one of those weirdos out there that likes playing with their diving bezels like I do, well, this is a good one to play with. Now, I am sure that you are all curious as to how the Zenobia wears on the wrist and how it will look for all of your admirers. Well, guess what? If you have a 7¼ inch wrist, it's going to look a little something like this. Here's the Zenobia Type D on my 7¼ inch wrist. Of course, this is what it'll look like for all of your admirers, and I'm actually taking it in now. It's so gorgeous. I really like yellow dials. Why don't we do more yellow dials? What's wrong with us? I think that this year, 2019, is going to be the year of the yellow dial. I'm just going to call it. 2018 was bronze cases. This year, let's pump out some yellow dials. Anyways, and when you are going to admire it, it's going to look a little something like this. And here is the Zenobia D on a 7¼ inch wrist, and you can see what I'm talking about. This looks a whole heck of a lot if you are a Squale 1521 owner, this looks a whole heck of a lot like that watch, aside from the bracelet. And that watch could definitely use a bracelet, in my opinion. Not this bracelet, but a bracelet, and it would look really, really stellar. But here is the Zenobia. I love the insert on this guy. I don't even mind that it's, high gloss and a fingerprint magnet. It's a really good looking insert at that. It kind of reminds me of my Manta, although my Manta's insert isn't as much of a smudge magnet as this. I don't know what it is about the glossy finish of this case in general, but yeah, this is a smudgy girl. And not in a bad way, not in a horrible way. Like, if you can put up with a few smudges, then this won't bother you. Otherwise, it looks and wears really well. Again, at over 13 millimeters thick, it definitely shows. This isn't going to be great if you like to put your watch under a cuff or a sweater, whatever you're wearing. This isn't going to do those things very conveniently because it is a little bit thicker than your average watch. But you know what? I think it wears it well, though. That girth, it wears it well. While the Zenobia D is certainly a uniquely inspired watch, it's not a wholly original one at that. I like the tie-in with the ship. Apparently, part of the color range here is in tribute to this watch's namesake, the Zenobia. However, the watch itself is, again, very similar to other watches you could be putting your money towards. So, is this really something worth your time? I think if you're a fan of that Facebook group, it's obviously something you're going to want to own, a little piece of that group's history. Not to mention the fact that you're getting a very well-constructed case head and movement inside. So for the cost, I think it's a pretty smashing deal, although there are a lot of watches, again, that are similar to this. I think that judgment call is entirely up to you. You know how the show works. Everything is fairly anecdotal here. I'm just giving you my opinions on these pieces, and in truth, I only want these to act as a consumer guide. So I'm never going to tell you to do one thing or another unless it's a don't buy video. Then you listen to me. No, really. Make up your own opinion of these things. I'm just fortunate enough to be able to have these sent my way. Again, I'd like to thank Al personally for sending this off to be reviewed. I did enjoy my time with this piece. It's nice to check out a Prometheus. Again, very similar to Borealis's build quality, which is hit or miss in some departments. But for the most part, it's a very good case head and a very good movement for the right price. Also, I believe you get like a leatherette travel pouch with this. Don't quote me on all of the end products, but if you do sign up for this, you're getting a few more accoutrements than just the watch and bracelet. At any rate, if you found this video entertaining in the least, feel free to hit the Zenobia. Had to say it one more time. If you found this video enjoyable, feel free to hit that like button. Looks a whole heck of a lot like this guy. If you know folks that wanted a Squale-like diver, well, feel free to share this video with them in case they don't want to be part of the uncool crowd that owns a Squale. Well, guess what? They can pick up the Zenobia. I got it in there one more time. They can pick this piece up and get a very similar look and feel on the wrist as they Squale 1521s. It's a pretty handsome watch in my opinion, and this mimics that look very well. And if you enjoyed the content today, well, guess what? Take Time will be your consumer guide for the watch market for life if you decide to subscribe today. So feel free to hit that subscribe button, and while you're down there, you can hit a little bell icon just next to that to be alerted as to when my videos air. Again, my name is Patrick Marlett, and thank you for the time. You guys can tell me, was that too harsh on the Zenobia? Let me know. I mean, it is very similar to, that's sort of what Borealis and Prometheus do. They make Homage-esque watches. Sometimes straight up homages, and sometimes pretty unique designs. There's another watch on their site. Gosh, you know what? Give me 1 second. I got my laptop in front of me. Tell me if you're going in on this watch instead. I think it's like the Seahawk, Sea Hunter, Eagle Ray. The Eagle Ray. So guys, if you're getting an Eagle Ray, let me know your thoughts on that piece when it comes in. I don't know if that's a pre-order, if that thing's out right now. All depends on when you watch this and the date I'm filming it. The date on this watch is not accurate, by the way, so don't try to gauge. Don't try to gauge from that. But yeah, the Eagle Ray is a really handsome looking piece. As a matter of fact, I really like the dodecagon accent of the internal ring. There's like a ring. Just go to their site. I'm going to link, obviously, this watch in the description, but you'll see what I'm talking about. The dodecagon is a 12-pointed object, essentially, and there's like a little ring on the outside of that sapphire crystal that marks the hours. It's really, really handsome. It's very similar to my Grand Seiko. I mean, not really, but that has a dodecagon bezel. So there you go. That's same-ish. At any rate, tell me what you think about this guy on the wrist. Do you like the aesthetic of the bracelet, at least? I'm just not a huge fan of the look of this bracelet. I do know what it is. It's just the high polished nature of it. It's just not, I don't know. I just don't like high polished bits on dive watches or tool watches in general. I'm not really a fan of high polished bits because in general, these things are going to get banged up. And you can see this was before me, I promise. That little scratch right there, not me. But it just goes to show how easy it is to scratch this thing. And that might be because it's been getting stuck in that end link, maybe. Then it could be me. But anyway, what bracelet do you think would have looked better on this? Don't say Oyster Link. You could say Oyster Link. It might have looked better on this. But like an Angus or a Jubilee might look good. Angus is, I'm pretty sure, a naming convention of strap code. I believe strap code makes an Angus bracelet, but I think that would be a good aesthetic for this. But this not my favorite bracelet combo. The head, however, gotta love a yellow dial. If you're gonna buy a yellow dial, I know a lot of folks don't get too enthused about yellow dials, but I am a sucker for them. At any rate, hope this was enough additional wrist time for you. I got some people saying they wanted a shot further out, but I know enough folks get tired of seeing my face in these videos, so this end portion is really just for you in the watch, okay? You can mute it now if you want. You don't have to listen to me talk if you just want to look at the watch. Yeah, but that's what this end portion is for. I'm not going to give you I'm not going to set up cameras for this. I just want to give you some wrist time, honest to God wrist time. This is what it looked like when you're looking down on it. Probably have it on your left wrist, but same idea. At any rate, take care, guys. See you in the next one.